The Woman in the Ashen Vale. In the autumn of 1970, the remote valley of Isdalen, nestled in the rugged hills outside Bergen, Norway, was a place where the wind carried secrets. The valley, known as Death's Valley to locals, was a stark expanse of rock and heather, shadowed by cliffs that seemed to lean inward, as if guarding something ancient. It was here, on a cold November morning, that a hiker stumbled upon a Badio woman, burned beyond recognition, her possessions scattered like offerings around her. The police called her the Isdal Woman, a name that would haunt Bergen for decades. Her identity was never uncovered, her death a puzzle of coded notes, false names, and burned fingerprints. But the truth was far stranger than the mystery the world would come to know. This is not that story. Not exactly. This is what the valley whispered when the wind grew still. The hiker's discovery. Einar Solberg was no stranger to a botanist in his late 30s. He'd spent years mapping the valley's flora, his boots worn thin from its rocky trails. On November 29, 1970, he hiked alone, his rucksack heavy with notebooks and a thermos of coffee. The air was sharp, the sky a bruised grey, and the valley felt quieter than usual, as if the birds had fled. He was following a narrow path near Flyen Mountain when he smelled a faint, acrid scent, like charred wood mixed with something sweeter, almost sickly. He found her in a clearing, half hidden by a cluster of boulders. She lay on her back, her body blackened, her limbs twisted in a way that suggested not just fire but something deliberate, as if she'd been arranged. Around her were objects, pristine despite the blaze, a cracked watch, a pair of scorched glasses, a silver ring etched with unfamiliar symbols. The ground beneath her was scorched in a perfect circle, the heather untouched just beyond it. Einar's breath caught, not from the sight of death he'd seen enough in his studies of Dickerbot, from the way the air felt wrong, heavy with a silence that pressed against his ear. He ran to the nearest village, his heart pounding, and called the police. By noon, the clearing was crawling with officers, their boots trampling the heather. They found more, a burned notebook with pages of cryptic numbers, a scarf with a faint monogram, and a small vial of liquid that smelled of almonds, but tested as water. The woman's fingerprints were gone, melted by the fire, and her face was unrecognizable. The police were baffled, but Einar couldn't shake the feeling that the valley itself was watching, its cliffs like eyes, the town that whispered. Bergen was a city of rain and secrets, its cobblestone streets winding through a history of Viking ghosts and wartime shadows. The discovery in Isdalen sent ripples through the community. The newspapers dubbed her the Isdal Woman, speculating wildly spy runaway, victim of a lover's betrayal. The police, led by Inspector Torvald Hagen, a man with a penchant for order, chased leads that went nowhere. The woman had checked into hotels under multiple names: Genevieve Lavier, Claudia Nielsen, Elizabeth Lean Howell, Falls, all dead ends. Her possessions, meticulously catalogued, offered no clarity. Coded notes, wigs, a burned passport with no discernible origin. Ingrid Larsen, a librarian who volunteered to help decipher the notebook's codes, became obsessed. The numbers weren't random, they formed patterns, sequences that hinted at coordinates, dates, or something else entirely. She worked late into the night, her desk littered with maps and cryptology texts, but the codes seemed to shift, as if mocking her efforts. One night, alone in the library, she heard a faint tapping, like fingers on glass. She looked up to see a shadow outside the window, a tall, thin figure draped in a veil of grey, its face obscured. She blinked, and it was gone, but the tapping lingered in her dreams, a rhythm that matched the numbers in the notebook. The valley itself became a place to avoid. Hikers reported strange occurrences, compasses spinning wildly, trails looping back on themselves, a faint smell of ash where no fire had been. Children in Bergen whispered of a woman in grey, seen at dusk, her veil trailing like smoke. They said she didn't walk but glided, her eyes hidden but her presence heavy, like a storm about to break. Parents dismissed it as childish fear, but even they avoided Isdalen after dark. The veil that moved. By December, the investigation stalled. The coroner's report was inconclusive: death by fire, yes, but no trace of accelerant, no clear The woman's body was preserved, but the mortician, a nervous man named Björn, swore her fingers twitched once, though he'd never admitted publicly. Inspector Hagen, frustrated, turned to the town's eccentrics for answers. Among them was Solveig, an old herbalist who lived on the edge of Bergen, her cottage filled with dried plants and books no one could read. Solveig claimed the valley was thin, a place where the world's skin was stretched taut, letting something else seep through. She'd seen the woman before. She said not in life, but in visions, years ago. "She's not one of us," Solveig whispered, her eyes sharp despite her age. "She's a vessel, carrying something older." The fire didn't kill her, it set her free. Hagen scoffed, but took her notebook, a leather-bound relic filled with sketches of spirals and symbols that matched the ring found with the body. Solveig warned him not to keep it too long. "It sees you," she said. "It knows your name." Ingrid, meanwhile, was unraveling. The codes consumed her, appearing in her dreams as a voice, soft and sibilant, reciting numbers that burned behind her eyelids. She started seeing the veiled woman everywhere, standing at the edge of the library, reflected in her teacup, lingering in the fog that rolled off the fjord. The tapping grew louder, a constant rhythm that drowned out her thoughts. One night, she followed it, leaving the library and walking toward Isdalen, the notebook clutched to her chest. She didn't return. The next morning, her shoes were found in the same clearing, arranged neatly beside a boulder, a faint smudge of ash on the ground. The notebook was gone, but the police found a single page caught in the heather, its numbers rewritten in a script no one recognized. Hagen locked it in his office, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the page was watching him, its ink shifting when he looked away. The fire that lingered. January brought a bitter cold to Bergen, and with it, a new wave of fear. The valley was no longer just a place of death, it was a wound, bleeding strangeness into the town. Fishermen reported lights in Isdalen at night, flickering like distant stars but too low, too deliberate. A schoolteacher found her chalkboard covered in symbols she didn't remember drawing, spirals and numbers that matched the notebook's code. Children stopped playing near the valley, claiming they heard a woman's voice, singing in a language that wasn't Norwegian. Einar, the botanist, couldn't stay away. He returned to Isdalen, driven by a need to understand what he'd seen. He found the clearing unchanged, the scorched circle still perfect, the air heavy with the smell of ash and almonds. But now there were Mark's handprints in the ash, too long, too thin, as if something had crawled from the center of the circle. He followed them, his flashlight cutting through the dusk, until they led to a cave hidden behind a cliff. The entrance was narrow, its walls slick with something that wasn't water, and the air inside hummed with a low, resonant tone. Inside, he found her, or something like her, a figure in a grey veil, standing in the dark, her form flickering like a flame. Her hands were outstretched, holding a notebook that pulsed with faint light. "You saw me," she said, her voice a chorus of whispers, each word layered with others. "Now you're mine." Einar tried to run, but the cave seemed to shift, the walls closing in, the hum deafening. He stumbled out at dawn, his flashlight dead, his notebook filled with sketches. He didn't remember drawing spirals, symbols, a veiled face with no eyes. He told no one, but the valley had marked him. He stopped hiking, stopped writing, his days spent staring out his window, waiting for the tapping to return. It always did. The town that broke. Bergen tried to forget. The police closed the case, calling the Isdal woman's death a suicide, though no one believed it. The valley was cordoned off, but hikers still vanished, their belongings found in neat piles, always with a smudge of ash. Solveig's cottage burned down in February, the fire starting in her library, though she survived. Her eyes haunted as she whispered about the woman who carried the flame. Ingrid's disappearance was blamed on a breakdown, her shoes the only trace, but her family swore they heard tapping at their windows at night. Einar left Bergen in the spring, his botanist's curiosity replaced by a quiet dread. He burned his notebooks, but the sketches reappeared in his dreams, the veiled woman's face growing clearer each time. Hagen retired, his office drawer still holding the notebook's page, though he swore it was blank now, the ink gone like it had never been. The valley remained, its cliffs silent but watchful, its air heavy with the promise of something waiting. Years passed, and the Isdal woman became a legend, a ghost story told to scare children, but the valley never forgot. Hikers who ventured too close reported a smell of ash, a hum in their ears, a shadow in a grey veil at the edge of their vision. Some found objects, rings, glasses, scraps of paper with numbers that shifted when read, and always the tapping, faint but relentless, following them home. The woman was never identified, but those who know the truth, those who felt the valley's weight, say she was a door, a crack in the world, and the fire was her key. The notebook, if it still exists, is out there, waiting for someone new to read its codes, to hear its whispers. If you find it, if you feel its pull, don't open it, because once you do, you'll see her, the woman in the ashen veil, standing in the dark, her hands outstretched, her voice calling your name, and once she sees you, the valley will never let you go.